Isaiah chapter 44, verses 24 through 28 states, "Thus says Jehovah your Redeemer, and the one who formed you from the womb. I, Jehovah, am the maker of all things, stretching out the heavens by myself, and spreading out the earth all alone, causing the omens of boasters to fail, making fools out of diviners, causing wise men to draw back, and turning their knowledge into foolishness, confirming the word of his servant and performing the purpose of his messengers. It is I who says to Jerusalem, she shall be inhabited, and of the cities of Judah, they shall be built. And I will raise up her ruins again. It is I who says to the depth of the sea, be dried up, and I will make your rivers dry. It is I who says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and he will perform all my desire. And he declares of Jerusalem, she will be built, and of the temple, your foundation will be laid. In this text, specific predictions are mentioned rather than a more general claim of declaring what is to come, similar to what we have seen earlier. And by validating the truthfulness of his word as opposed to the foolish knowledge of the diviners, and by doing exactly what he said he would, God makes a mockery of the false gods who can do neither of these things. The reason God is God is because he knows and will perform that which has yet to occur. And those specific things which God says will occur includes the re-inhabitation of Jerusalem and the rebuilding of the cities of Judah. And when we consider the implications of this promise, it becomes abundantly clear that God must have foreknowledge of an almost innumerable number of future actions and decisions of men. And just think about how much is involved in the re-inhabiting and rebuilding of cities. Imagine the number of people involved whose every action to move, build, plant, establish their homes, etc., must be known by God. And in light of God's judgment upon the boasters and diviners in verse 25, God cannot afford his word to not come true. That is, for God to simply peek into the future is too big of a risk, considering the innumerable number of actions involved, whereas the slightest alteration of even one of these actions could result in a completely different outcome. Therefore, it won't simply do to get a whole lot of things right, but miss on several points. And the contrast with these pretender deities requires that God gets everything right, where everything includes the innumerable future actions and choices of men. And the only conclusion one can rightly draw then is that God knows precisely all of the conditions that are necessary for those predictions to come true, which includes the innumerable conditions without which God cannot be confident in what he planned is going to occur. And what's even more interesting is the prediction of a future king, which God gave the name Cyrus nearly 200 years before his parents gave him that name. So not only will God rebuild Jerusalem, but he will use this pagan king to perform his desires. And again, consider the vast amount of circumstances that God must know in advance for this prediction to be given. And to illustrate, at this point, God must know the following: the fall of Assyria, the rise and fall of Babylon, the rise of Medo-Persia, the fall of Israel, the fall of Judah, the birth and naming of Cyrus, Cyrus's childhood and adulthood, his selection as king, his willingness to consider helping the Israelites, his decision to rebuilding Jerusalem, and much, much more. And this list touches on the most significant things. But within each item is hidden an innumerable number of choices and actions that would affect everything if even one of them went wrong. Consider what Isaiah 44:27 states. It is I who says to the depth of the sea, be dried up, and I will make your rivers dry. Now this seems to be a rather odd statement that is stuck between God's claim to rebuild Jerusalem and his raising up of Cyrus to accomplish his promise. But the statement is not so odd if verses 27 and 28 are taken together, where God claims to be the one who accomplishes precisely what he wants to happen. In other words, verse 27 says, it is I who dries up the sea. And verse 28 says, it is I who works through Cyrus. Thus, raising up, naming, and using Cyrus in exactly the same ways God intends is no more to him than just drying up the sea. He has just as much control over one as he does the other. Now, as far as scriptural texts which affirm God's exhaustive foreknowledge, much more could be presented. But for the remainder of this video, I would like to explain why this issue really matters and how it can dramatically affect our lives as Christians. And the first and one of the most important of these is prayer. Consider what Isaiah chapter 40 verses 13 through 14 states. Who has directed the Spirit of Jehovah? Or as his counselor has informed him? With whom did he consult, and who gave him understanding? And who taught him in the path of justice, and taught him knowledge, and informed him of the ways of understanding? In light of this, can God be informed? Can you tell him something that he doesn't already know? Furthermore, why would God want or even need your counsel in the first place? And those who deny God's exhaustive foreknowledge may feel that their beliefs provide more meaning in the area of prayer, as if our prayers actually do something in shaping God's will. But what does this actually follow from this line of thinking? Well, I don't think it follows that we should deny God's exhaustive foreknowledge. For most anyone would agree that God knows all things past and present. And if this is the case, then it is impossible for humans to inform God of their thoughts, longings, concerns, and requests, because God would already know them. Now, in light of this, how could prayer possibly influence God in this decision-making process? Now, since God would know every possible state of heart or mind that we might have, it would seem that one could not believe that they can actually tell God something in prayer that he doesn't already know or has fully anticipated. So what are the implications of this position if it were true and consistent? For one, we would have to deny of God not only his exhaustive knowledge of the future, but also of the past and present. Now, if God did not already know everything about us and anticipate what we would say or do in the future, then we really could tell God things that he did not already know. Now, this would make our relationship with God a sort of give and take relationship. And it's kind of the same thing that we experience at a human level. Now, this may sound great, But when one considers that only God knows all that can be known, and only God has unsurpassable wisdom to discern what is best for us, and that only God has pure motives, it makes me wonder why it's supposedly so great that God's will would be dependent on our prayers. But what function does prayer really have if this is not the case?